You know, it's very disturbing hearing your story because the fastest growing population in Northern Virginia is Asian American. And so no group should suffer any kind of discrimination, but it's just hearing these stories just is very alarming as somebody who represents such a diverse community. It's also important to know here in Prince William County, we are a minority-majority county. We're the second largest county in Virginia, and a majority of our population are minorities. And that's why this subject is so important, to make sure that nobody's targeted and that everybody has a fair shake. I call upon the distinguished ranking member of the committee, Mr. Cummings.
Yeah, I just, first of all, thank you all for your testimony. As I was sitting here, I was thinking to myself how important it is. You know, a lot of times you'll have an unfortunate thing to happen, and then you don't address the problems that caused it at that moment, and then it's sort of forgotten until the next time it comes up. And, you know, I'm just grateful to all of you for being here and providing your testimony so that we don't forget what we went through, so that we will not hopefully have to be going through this again. Mr. Prisby, I want to, you know, you listed a number of things that you thought should be changed, and one of them that I did not hear, and maybe I just didn't hear you, missed it, maybe I missed it. I didn't, did you mention early voting?
In Virginia, we call it absentee voting. So okay. I'm absolutely in support of extending the hours, expanding the hours for early voting or absentee voting.
Yeah, because what I found in Maryland is that it has been extremely helpful to us. We still had long lines, even with early voting. But the fact is that, you know, like say there were for each congressional district, there were maybe 5 or 6 voting places in that whole district, and so people had to travel to get there. In other words, it wasn't as convenient. But I found that when I would go to these early voting spots, you know, people would be there, and they would, I mean, very long lines, even for early voting. But it did take the weight off of election day. Mr. Scarborough, I was listening to Reverend James's testimony, and I think Ms. Ho also mentioned it. Do we have accommodations for senior citizens or people who may be disabled? Because I remember I took my mother, who's 86 years old, and one of her biggest worries was, you know, how was she going to be able to stand in line for a very long time? And a lot of times people don't think about those things. I mean, we don't, you know, unless you've been there, you don't think about things like whether there's going to be a railing, whether you're going to have to have a bathroom nearby, things of that nature. And I'm just wondering, what do we do in Virginia to try to accommodate, say, seniors and people trying to vote?
Well, in terms of legal requirements, you know, we provide the option for people to, in addition to, that's one of the reasons for voting absentee in person, but also we have curbside voting. And so if someone is going to have problems either getting into the polling place or standing in line for a long period of time, they can actually call ahead of time. And we have a number of precincts where there are assisted living facilities where they call our chief and they say, okay, Westminster voters are going to show up at 10 o'clock. So then we have officers that can actually do the whole voting process outside in their cars. So that's the legal assistance. And then we're forced to take the schools and the facilities as they are on election day, but we train our officers that whenever possible to be aware of someone who can't stand in line for a long time. You know, and I saw on election day there were a number of cases where the chief would, you know, move someone up to the front of the line, and fortunately other people, even though they'd waited a long time, were patient and understood that. So that happens more frequently when we don't have a huge turnout election where everyone's scrambling around. I know that in off-year elections, you know, our officers have the time to be more sensitive and actually look at the lines and move people to the front when they can. But in November election, our officers were so busy that actually we used some pages for that. Also, the outside observers, if they come in to notify our officers that there's someone who needs assistance, we'll try and move them to the front of the line.
Well, one of the things that I was just wondering about, if you, I think it was Mr. Principe that said that there was, this sort of came as a surprise, and I was just wondering, leading up to the election, did you all say, well, this is probably going to be a really big election. We've got these questions on the ballot, and we've got, did you predict a lot of this, or did you have discussions about it, and what did you do to prepare for it? And if you didn't prepare for it, why not?
Well, we definitely had discussions beginning back in 2011. Because we had an historic turnout in 2008, and we knew based on a number of factors that the State Board of Elections, other election officials look at, we expected we would have at least as high a turnout, if not higher, in 2012. So when we were making expectations about the turnout, we knew we were going to have a high number of people. We actually, and that's why we added an additional absentee and voting location. We had 3 in 2008, we had 4 this year, and so we actually had an expanded opportunity for people to vote absentee in person if they qualified. Now, we had discussions with our voting machine vendor. And, we knew that we were approaching the end of the useful life of these machines. We had a finite number of machines, and that it was going to be a stretch, but the vendor thought we could make it through another presidential election. And as I mentioned earlier, we had lines during the day on 2008, but there wasn't a single precinct where we had people waiting in line at 7. So when we were allocating the voting machines, they were based on the size of the registered voters in each precinct. Now, if we had had more machines, then we obviously would have been able to have maybe 7 or 8 at River Oaks, and that would have helped a lot. But we had a finite number of machines to spread around the county, and River Oaks had 6. There are 3 precincts in Prince William that are actually larger by population, and they had 7 machines. So 7 was the largest number of machine we had in any precinct.
Just one other thing. Do you think your other 2 members of your board are they concerned when they might hear the testimony of Ms. Ho and Ms. James, Reverend James, with regard to people actually leaving? And Ms. Ho talked about a gentleman with toddlers, little kids trying to vote. It just seems to me that, Representative Connolly and I came to Congress not to shrink people's rights, but to expand them. And it just seems to me like this is, it's just causing people. I have discussions with some of my folks in Baltimore, and they say things like this. I say, "Are you going to vote?" They say, "No, I'm not going to vote." I said, "Why not? Why aren't you going to vote?" "Well, I don't want to serve on jury duty." And I've heard that. Don't act like I'm out here by myself. And so I'm saying to somebody that doesn't want to serve on jury duty, it seems to me that if they have a bad experience at the polling place and then have to leave, then that's forever planted in their mind. And guess what? Those little kids are saying, "Well, Daddy left," and maybe they then grow up saying, "Maybe I'm just supposed to leave. I'm not supposed to do this." What I'm saying is, I'm just wondering, what do you think will shake them and say that this is not a Democratic problem, it's not a Republican problem, this is a problem for all of us, and we need to do something about it? I mean, what needs to be done to get us where we need to be so that we don't have these kind of complaints, so that we make it easier for people to vote.
Right. Well, I can tell you that from the 7 years that I've been on the electoral board, unlike other counties and cities, we've gotten along pretty well on issues, and the only time we've had really a partisan breakdown was this year over extending voter hours for absentee in person. But personally, I think all three members of the electoral board and every member of the Board of Supervisors. I mean, we heard not only from Frank and from Mr. Jenkins, but we heard from Republicans on the west end of the county saying it's unacceptable for my voters to have to wait in line for 3 or 4 hours. So I do hope that this hearing and the focus that we've had on the long lines, that people don't forget, because one of the messages that I've tried to deliver is that this is the new reality for Virginia. I mean, for decades, nobody cared about presidential elections in Virginia. So we had relatively stable turnout. We didn't have to buy a number of new machines because we had a small number of people voting. Well, we've now gone through 2 hotly contested, very active turnout presidential elections, and I think that's the future for both Virginia and for Prince William County. And we have to, as an electoral board, as Board of Supervisors and General Assembly, recognize that and be willing to provide the resources to buy more machines, both for the county and for the state, so that we don't have a repeat of this event.
Thank you very much.